This is episode 42 of the Progression Health podcast. I'm here with online coach Natasha Barnes. Natasha, do you want to introduce yourself to the listeners?
Yeah, sure. I am Dr. Natasha Barnes. I'm a chiropractor. I'm also a competitive powerlifter, and I am a climbing coach, and I work with climbers for strength training and injury rehab.
Yeah, so pretty much just all around very strong person, I would say. So who do you specialize in your work? Like what typical client do you most commonly work with?
I specialize mostly in rock climbers, so climbing athletes. I do work with some powerlifters. I actually have a few clients who are like also climbers and powerlifters like me. But I would say predominantly rock climbers.
Interesting. So like, is rock climbing particularly big in the Bay Area?
It is, yeah. There's like 11 climbing gyms in the Bay Area. And that's grown a lot since I've lived here, which I've moved here in 2005. It's grown a lot. The sport of climbing is growing a lot. This last year was the first year that it was in the Olympics. So it is just growing exponentially.
Damn, yeah. I remember about 3 years ago, I went rock climbing and there was two older guys who were training and it was like they were jacked. So is it typically like if you stick around rock climbing long term, you kind of add muscle, like you typically add muscle or naturally like you adapt to the sport?
Yeah, it's definitely like there's a large component of strength to climbing for sure. It's a really technical sport. There's a lot of like technique to it. But there is like a strength component to it, especially like upper body and especially like forearms and fingers.
Interesting. So is there like a carryover then to powerlifting?
Probably not a huge carryover, although I've noticed with a lot of my clients, they tend to be like naturally pretty good at deadlifting. And I think that's because we use our posterior chain a lot when we're climbing. Like those are literally the same muscles that are holding us onto the wall, especially on steep climbs. So there's already some like upper body development there for climbers. So they tend to be really good at like naturally deadlifts and pull-ups and stuff like that, because those are the things that we're kind of doing when we're climbing.
Yeah, they're the active muscles when you're climbing. Yeah, very good. So I recently wrote a blog post about long-term exercise adherence. I think that's like pretty much what we're trying to get our clients to do is to like adhere to an exercise plan long-term, at least I am. And then you kind of refine it as you go. And an interesting question that I like to think about and ask the guests is, what do you like most about exercise? So what do you get out of exercise, or what does exercise do for you that you've been able to nail the adherence part of it, the hardest part of exercise?
Yeah. I don't know if my answer will be different than anybody else's, but I mean, obviously really like how exercise makes me feel, and I like feeling like a strong person. But for me, I think falling in love with the process of training has been something that really keeps me adherent. I think a lot of people, when they first start training, it's really easy and fun to like focus on the numbers and like if your goal is like weight loss or weight like muscle gain, focusing on like the physical results. But for me, being able to do, like I've been strength training consistently for 9, almost 10 years. And I probably only missed maybe like a handful of training sessions ever. But for me, that's because I have found ways to kind of fall in love with the process and just focusing on like the small in session goals, or, you know, little things like improving technique slightly, or knowing that I'm going to have to put in the work for several weeks in a row to get the result that I'm after. Like for a powerlifting competition, you know, I'm not going to train for a week or two and like be stronger. I know it's going to be a process. So I think if people can fall in love with the process of training and the process of like going through an exercise program, I think that can be really helpful for long-term adherence.
Yeah. I was thinking one of the points I made was like you have to intrinsically enjoy it. So you have to figure out what you enjoy about the mode of exercise you choose and enjoy that. Because if it's something external, like, you know, a fat loss goal, that's a fixed goal, whereas the continual goal is the process. So yeah, that's a really good tip that I'll try and keep in mind. And then just in terms of like habits so obviously process, focusing on the process, setting goals and stuff, they're like some kind of habits. What are like some key habits that that you have that help you to enjoy the process, to exercise long term?
Yeah, I think for me, making my training and my exercise like a non-negotiable and like making it part of my day. So like I literally have my training scheduled out in my like Google Calendar. I have the sessions scheduled out. And that's just like blocked off time where like it's dedicated for that. And like every morning or evening, I always go for a walk. That's something that's like a non-negotiable for me. And I'll listen to a podcast or an audiobook or sometimes just music, but like going on a walk, to get my steps in because I'm someone who works from home. So I'm not getting a lot of steps right now. But also because it's just so good for my mental health. So those are like kind of like two things that are like non-negotiable for me. And I'm lucky enough that I can schedule in training sessions at a fixed time during the week every week. But that's sort of helped me.
Yeah, that sounds really useful. So you make it a non-negotiable. I love that idea. And for me, it's I don't know, maybe you get this as well. I almost feel guilty if I don't train. I don't think that's healthy. I wouldn't say like to my client, I would be like, you should feel guilty if you don't train. But it's like, and maybe guilt's the wrong word, but it's kind of just like, so you mentioned like the mental health benefits and stuff. So it's like, I know the benefits. So if I don't get those benefits, I feel like I missed out, or I feel it. I don't feel it like, oh, I feel instantly like I missed something. It's more like I know better, so I kind of have to do better. And it's so clear within me, that if I don't follow through on that, it feels like something's not right. Do you get that?
Yeah, I get that. And like, I can see how some people might think it's unhealthy, but like the way that I talk about it with clients is like, it's like brushing your teeth. Like you're not like, oh, when am I going to brush my teeth today? I got to figure out a time to make that happen. You just do it every morning when you wake up and every night before you go to bed. Like you just do it and it's a non-negotiable and you don't think about it because it's an investment in the health of your teeth, right? And like that's how your exercise and training should be. Like it's a non-negotiable. It's something that you do because if you do it consistently over time, you're going to get the benefit of it. And so it makes sense. Like if you didn't brush your teeth one night before you go to bed, like yeah, you're going to feel kind of bad about that, right? Like
That, yeah, that's so funny. That is literally the best description I could think of. So it's I guess it's not really guilt. It's more just like I feel bad because I know that this is something that's worthwhile to do, like brushing your teeth. That it's quite natural now, actually. Once you build the habit up and focus on the process.
yeah.
So you talked about like setting like goals, right? And I think that is something that's like a scary thing to do, even for me personally. And I know for clients it can be as well. So will you just talk a little bit about like why you set goals, the importance of it, and like let's say, even for me or for anyone else listening, of course, how to make it easier or less scary if they find it like a particular challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I think goals are important because it gives you something to shoot for in terms of like your exercise or your training. And I always like to refer to it as training because that's like, I don't know, I like that way of thinking about it, even if you're not like a competitive athlete, if you're just like a gen pop person who wants to stay healthy, like I still like framing it that way because I think if we frame it as training, then we can think of ourselves as athletes because everybody is an athlete. And if we think of ourselves as athletes, then we can think of our habits and the things that we do as like, this is something an athlete would do for their training. So I like framing it that way. Um, what was your original question? I lost my train of thought for a second there.
Yeah. So goal setting.
Goal setting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Importance of it.
having goals helps you with your trajectory for your training. Like it helps give you something to aim for. And it doesn't have to be like, I mean, I think it's great to have like big lofty goals. But it also doesn't have to be something crazy either. It doesn't have to be like some huge goal that like totally scares you, although I think those goals are good. For a lot of my clients, if they have a hard time setting like a big goal or like a big goal feels really overwhelming to them, we can have that big goal, but we're also going to set like process goals. So like what other things do we need to accomplish along the way here to get you to that goal? And for some people, like process goals are a little bit more digestible. So like a process goal could be like, if you, let's say you're like, okay, I want to deadlift this amount of weight by the time I turn 40 or something. Like, what do you need to do like week to week to get yourself there in a year or something like that? Well, we need to make sure that we're like actually doing our training sessions consistently. So like maybe that's a small process goal. We're like this week, let's focus on getting every session in. Let's like make it so you can check off those little boxes. And if you score some of those little wins, I feel like if we can stack little wins for ourselves or for our clients, then it builds some momentum and it's easier to keep going. So having those like smaller process goals is really good because it keeps people motivated. It makes us feel like we're doing something, like we're checking a box, like we have momentum towards those larger goals. And then if you just keep doing that and you keep the momentum up, before you know it, you look back a year and you've hit like major goals, you've hit milestones, you've made tons of progress, even though it doesn't feel like along the way you were doing anything super crazy.
Yeah, it's not crazy. You're like normalizing the process of hitting your targets, and then over time they compound. And yeah, so something I keep on talking about momentum all the time. I feel like I'm like overusing that word. I feel like it's tricky though because it's hard to convey to a client. So can you talk a little bit about momentum, and then also the second part is that you mentioned having a goal like I want to deadlift X amount by I'm 40. What do you think of setting goals with a time frame? So like, I want to deadlift 225 by the age of 40. Like, how do you fit in the time component? So it's one thing to set a goal, but the second part to put in time. I feel like with strength training, it's particularly tricky because there's so many challenges that can come up along the way.
Yeah. I think, trying to make our goals realistic is really important. Like, I think it is good to have like big, lofty goals because it helps you, you know, it helps you stay motivated. It helps you like shoot big. But we also want to keep them like reasonable, and that's where like you just have to think a little bit more about your goal, or if you have like a coach or a trainer who's helping you with establishing your goals where they can kind of keep things like realistic for you. um, I think that's really important. Time components are nice because it does put a little bit of pressure on you. Like if you want to do something by a certain time frame, then you're going to have to do X, Y, and Z to get there. And so it can kind of keep you on track with that. And even if you don't hit that goal, it can help you stay on track too. Um, we also want to keep it realistic, like I also don't want my clients putting these like unrealistic time goals on themselves. Like if that goal is not going to be realistic, or if they're going to have to like completely demolish themselves and like, do things that are maybe unhealthy to reach those goals as well. So keeping them realistic, but also like, I like time goals. Like for me, I love competing in powerlifting, but one of the things that I love about signing up for powerlifting meets is that it kind of gives me a focus for my training sessions, like a sort of like a medium or long term focus for my training sessions. And that is like a time constraint goal, but at the same time, like it's motivating for me because I know, okay, I only have like 14 weeks to prepare for this powerlifting meet. So got to make sure I've got all my ducks in a row, that I'm getting my training in, that I'm sleeping, that I'm focused on my nutrition for the next 14 weeks.
Very good. Yeah, actually, I'm just thinking of like not having time as an element to your goal. And it's like, well, then you're not setting the sort of parameters for failure. And it's like, you kind of want to know that, like, because otherwise, like, where the hell are you going? It's like,
Right.
where is the check mark to be like, right, I'm on the right path. Like the training session I did was good quality or it wasn't, or the training week or month. You don't know. So yeah, I think sort of even to answer my own question, like timing it's any element of time. I guess it doesn't have to be 40 or that length of time. It could be weekly or whatever. So yeah. So
Yeah.
you mentioned your powerlifting. So you're really good at powerlifting. I don't know if people know that. So I think there's a common misconception, and I can think of a couple of comments that I've heard of like, oh, I don't want to get like too bulky, or women shouldn't resistance train and stuff. And it's like, no, like, everybody should resistance train, like everybody should do it. So will you just talk a little bit about that, like misconception that like women shouldn't resistance train and like, your experience with powerlifting?
Yeah, totally. I think that's like a big hesitation for a lot of people when it comes to resistance training. And like, I know for a lot of women, it's a big concern. And especially for me personally, not for me personally, but like with the clientele that I work with, climbers, it's it's kind of like a sport that's like ballet or gymnastics where people are concerned about like strength to weight ratio. And so that is a concern that comes up for, people of any gender getting too big, or getting too bulky and muscular. And it's just a really big myth. Honestly, like it's a lot harder than people think to gain weight or to gain like a lot of muscle. Um, and sometimes when I ask people, like, well, what exactly are you concerned about? Like, because there's also people who say, like, well, I just put on weight really fast. Like, and I'm worried about that. Like, I know as soon as I start to strength train, I'm going to like put on weight. And, when I ask them about it, it's usually like a few pounds that they're concerned with. They're like, oh, yeah, as soon as I start lifting, I gain like 5 pounds instantly. And we know someone's not putting on 5 pounds of muscle instantly. It's normal to gain a little water weight, especially after a training session, and all of that kind of thing. And so, trying to explain that to people. But it's a lot harder to gain weight than people think. Like you have to be in a caloric surplus for a really long time. You have to be training really hard for a long time. I think when I first started powerlifting, I was climbing competitively. I was 112 pounds. I'm 5'2", just for context for people. I was 112 pounds. I've been as small as 99 pounds, just not healthy. And I've been as big as 162 pounds. So I've put on a significant amount of weight in the last like 9 or 10 years that I've been powerlifting. I'm now down a little bit. I'm usually like around like 137, 140 these days. But as somebody who intentionally tried to put on a lot of weight to be competitive in powerlifting, it is a lot harder than people think. And so I just tell people not to worry about it. A lot of times, like what you're seeing in your body when you're changing is your body just like it's like a recomp that's happening with your body. And I've actually talked to clients about this before. And when they actually weigh themselves consistently, they're not really gaining that much weight. And some of my clients will be like, well, my pants fit differently, my clothes are fitting differently. And if we look at their weight's not changing, but their measurements will sometimes change. And it just means that like they're recomping, like they're putting on muscle. So your body can change that way. But it's just really hard to put on muscle mass, and it's not something that most people need to worry about. And in fact, like for a lot of my clients, they could actually benefit from putting on some muscle mass because that's going to be protective for them. Like it's not, a lot of climbers like are worried about strength to weight, and they think that if they put on muscle, it's going to be this dead weight that they're dragging up the wall. But if you're training the right way, it's actually muscle mass that's like helping you. It's not like dead weight that you're putting on your body that you have to drag up the wall. It's muscle mass that's actually helping you climb harder, and do harder moves and get into harder positions. So it's like functional, and it's also protective. It's going to help people reduce their risk of getting injured in the future. And, for a lot of people, especially like maybe Gen Pop, this is really important, but climbers too. Like we all say, like we love climbing, we want to climb forever. All of us want to like climb until we're like 80. Well, the older we get, the more we start to lose muscle. So like you really need to like invest in building some muscle so that you have some muscle to start with. Because by the time you are 80, you're not going to have any leg muscle to be hiking up to the crag. So it's also an investment in like your future health, not just like your sports performance.
Yeah, it's kind of like start saving for retirement now. Don't wait till you're retired to start doing it. Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
it's completely protective as well, like because we're going to get older, like father time or mother time or whoever, whatever you want to call it, is undefeated. And it's like we know that's going to happen. We can look at like older people in our family or in the community and see that like if they it's staring us right in the face. Like if we don't look after ourselves now, we're going to pay for it down the line.
So I always tell people like, don't worry about it. Like you honestly like putting muscle on your frame is like putting money in the bank. Like it's going to protect you. It's probably not going to like decrease your sports performance. And you're not going to look bulky. I think a lot of people, there's like a misconception, like people want to look like they want to lean down or they want to like tone. But that actually means you have to have some muscle to tone down to, and if you don't have that muscle, then you're not going to look toned. And lifting weights is something that can actually help you look more toned, not bulky. So
Yeah, absolutely. Like the point as well about getting too bulky Like it takes you just in my experience, like I had to have like when I was bulking for a couple of months, I was like it was like 4,000 calories a day or something, and it was like my appetite was like at like 3,500, and I had to eat that like 4,000 because I was so active at the time. So it's like you're not just going to get like bulky and have a lot of muscle by chance. Like you don't get rich by chance. So yeah,
Right.
it's really like a small concern. And even you're talking about like it's protective, muscle is protective. The opposite is also a risk. So as far as I know, and obviously I'm not like an expert on hormones, but as far as I know, so muscle is an active tissue, but so is fat, and it secretes hormones as far as I know. So like you can only imagine people who are overweight or obese, they have a higher risk for a whole host of metabolic diseases. So it's like if you don't strength train, the fat is kind of working, secreting hormones, while the muscle can secrete or function to protect you. So it's like the fat can work against your health. It's not just sitting there, whereas the muscle can protect you, and you can just live a better quality life. Like you can live more of a life. You can do your rock climbing. You can do your strength training. You can pick up your grandkids or your own kids. You can live so much more.
Yeah, and be independent into old age, like be able to go get your own groceries, walk down the street and stuff like that.
Yeah. So you mentioned just climbing and like strength to weight ratio. So a common goal among clients is that they want to be able to do a pull up, and I'm like, it's a lot of it. How much of it do you think is down to strength to weight ratio in terms of being able to do
So,
a
I
full
mean,
pull up?
obviously, something like that is there. It is going to be there's like a strength ratio component, but I think what a lot of people don't realize is like there are more than one variable we can manipulate there, right? Like you can get lighter to feel stronger, or you can get stronger to feel stronger. And getting stronger is going to also improve your strength to weight ratio. And even if your body weight increases a little bit, if your strength is increasing a lot, then you're still going to have a higher strength to weight ratio. And one of those options is more sustainable. Like, how much weight can you really lose? And at what point of weight loss are you going to start to feel weak because you're starting to lose too much weight? And that's what ends up happening with climbers is they diet, because I think it's easy for people to wrap their minds around just if I just don't eat, I'm going to lose weight and I'll feel lighter. But that's a really temporary feeling. The longer you do that, you're going to start to lose muscle mass and eventually you're going to start to feel weak. But strength training, I think for some people, it's hard to imagine like how they don't know how to reliably get stronger. So that just doesn't seem like an option to them. But getting stronger is a lot more sustainable. There's other health benefits that come from it. And so even if you're gaining weight, if you're also getting stronger, you can still improve your strength to weight ratio. Like I'm much heavier than I was when I was climbing competitively, but my strength to weight ratio levels are the same right now because they're actually the stronger now because I'm so much stronger.
So you've recomped and you have added strength and muscle for the weight ratio or weight you're at, which is like that's how you're able to do the more pull-ups and more weight, which is really cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like easily able to do way more pull-ups. I'm easily able to do like heavier weighted pull-ups. I'm also hanging more weight objectively on my fingertips than I was when I was lighter. My fingers are objectively stronger.
So you're able to do a lot more, which is like that must be so rewarding and like so cool to see.
Yeah, I'm able to do a lot more. Like my style for climbing has completely changed where like before I really liked like subtle technical climbing because it didn't require a lot of strength, just like a lot of finesse. And now I find myself like seeking out like really powerful um, climbing that has bigger moves because I just have so much more strength. I can do that kind of climbing now. So it's just completely even changed like my climbing.
Yeah, and that's like a really long-term process. I'd imagine that like um you could kind of like see the ability you have and say, right, I'm going to maximize this. Or I feel like what you've probably done is decided like, right, no, I want to kind of expand my ability, like in my strength and be able to like do more or set loftier goals. Is that like the process you've used?
Yeah, basically. So like the way that I kind of got into strength training was I was a competitive rock climber And I started struggling with like different injuries, specifically like shoulder injuries. And I did a little bit of rehab, which helped a little bit, but I started to realize that like I needed to get my shoulders stronger so that I could keep up with like the demands of climbing, which is pretty shoulder intensive, lots of hanging and doing a lot of shoulder intensive movements. And so I got into strength training for that. And that's something that like I found really helpful was getting stronger. I lost my train of thought again.
So I was saying about how your process is kind of more long term. So you decided that you wanted to be stronger. You set bigger goals, and that allows you to do the style of climbing that you have now, as opposed to the finesse before.
Right. Yeah. So like I knew for myself personally that I was a really good technical climber. I was lucky enough to start when I was 16. I had good climbing coaches. I learned movement and technique pretty well. And naturally, I've always had like pretty strong fingers. So I knew that for me, like the thing that was holding back my climbing was actually just physical strength. And when I started getting into strength training as a way to rehab my shoulders, I started realizing that this was something that was actually going to help my climbing. And so I started doing more strength training as a way to supplement my climbing. And I was at that point, I had been climbing for so long, and I've been climbing for like 23, almost 24 years. So at that point, like I am willing to invest however many, like a year or two or more. At this point, it's been 9 now. Because I got sidetracked and got really sucked into strength sports, which is fun. But I was willing to invest like a year or two or however long it took to like really build up my strength foundation to support the climbing that I wanted to do. And I think that's something that a lot of people could benefit from, like no matter what their goals are, if it's health, if it's performance for their sport, like spending a period of time where you are doing like what I like to call as off-season training is what a lot of athletes would call it, where we're specifically going in and like building our strength foundation because it's going to support some of the goals that we have. And at that period of time, you might not be focused on like sports performance, but that's okay. It doesn't mean you have to completely stop practicing your sport, but it does mean that your focus is on building your strength foundation. And that's something that I've tried to talk to a lot of climbers about doing because it's new to the sport of climbing. Like climbing is a pretty new sport relative to lots of other sports. And if you look at what other athletes do, they spend a period of time in their off season, like doing that, where they're not like focused on their sports performance. They're still practicing their sport. They're still doing practice, but they are spending time in the gym, building up their strength foundation, doing hypertrophy or doing strength training that's going to support their sports performance. And I think it's really important to cycle through periods like that, whether you're just someone who's in it for health or whether you're someone who's in it for like sports performance, because it's going to give you more longevity in your sport or in your day-to-day life. So,
yeah. So Mark Bell said, strength is never a weakness. And I'm like, absolutely. I'm like, if you get stronger, it's just going to benefit everything. It doesn't slow you down. I'm trying to like prove that like you can squat and run. So we'll see how that goes. But
yeah.
I'm like, I know the fundamentals of training. I know what is possible. It's just hard. It's just not the typical track. So we could talk about injuries, which we'll get to in a bit. And you're just speaking about doing an off season. I saw a basketball player, Bradley Beal. So he like is one of the highest paid basketball players. In his off season, he was like deadlifting like 405, which you would say like, you know, oh, you don't need to deadlift that much. And it's just like, well, why not? Like, so I'm thinking recently, I'm like, if we're not in the gym to like lift heavy and get strong, right? It's like, why are you in the gym? What other reason are you in the gym for, you know? So I'll kind of backtrack a little bit. So somebody likes to resistance train, or they want to get stronger, or they want to get more muscular. So they're in the gym, right? So anyone who's not in the gym, that's fine. So you're already in the gym, but you're not training to get as strong as you possibly can. In my head, I'm like, okay, I'm like straight away, I'm like, what are you doing? Like, why are you not trying to get as strong as you possibly can? And unless you have a very good reason not to, you should be. Do you get me? So it's like, if someone is like, oh, I'm afraid, or, you know, I'm just a bit lazy or whatever, that's not good enough. Like you need to think of something better to kind of like use as an approach to your training, because you're seriously missing out. Like there's such a huge benefit to be got, as you can, attest to, that when you're really strong, it benefits so many other areas of your life. So what are your thoughts around people, training, but not trying to be as strong as they can in the gym?
Yeah, that's actually something that I run into with climbers. So like a lot of climbers, like, no, they should be in the gym. No, they should be doing some kind of resistance training. But there's this notion of like there is a too strong. Like if you can lift, a little bit, that's enough for climbing. And some people, like, I don't know if this happens with the people that you work with, but there are like arbitrary numbers that get thrown around. A big one is like, oh, if you can deadlift double body weight as a climber, you're fine. You really don't need to deadlift more than that. That's all you really need to be able to do for climbing performance. So if you can already do that, you're wasting your time in the gym. And I think that that's like a bad way to think about it, because first of all, we don't know how strong you need to be for climbing. We don't know. We haven't like studied that. Second of all, what's hard for each person and what's going to help them get stronger is going to be different person to person. I have climbers who will never deadlift double body weight unless they start training like power lifters. And I have clients who can easily deadlift 405 with just a few weeks of like structured strength training. And so am I supposed to stop the people who can't deadlift double body weight from climbing so that we can start training like power lifters so they can get to a 2 times body weight deadlift? And am I supposed to tell the people who can deadlift 405 to stop strength training completely because they're too strong? Absolutely not. Like those numbers are really arbitrary and it's going to be different person to person. And I think telling somebody that there's such a thing as too strong is really harmful, actually, because if you're not training hard enough to actually get stronger, you're not going to get the benefits that you're trying to get from strength training. And we're not just talking about like, okay, maybe you're strong enough to like do performance rock climbing. Okay, fine. But that's not the only reason why we're strength training. The other reasons why we're strength training are those health benefits that we mentioned. Like, we want to keep our muscles well trained. We want to get these other health benefits that we're after. And if you're not training hard enough, you're not going to get those benefits. So I think it's really important to make sure that we're training hard enough for the individual, whether that means you're in the gym deadlifting 500 pounds, even though that's not like very typical for somebody of your sport, or you're in there deadlifting like body weight or 1.5 times body, wherever you're at, meeting people where they're at and making sure that training is actually challenging enough for them to get stronger, and not putting out this idea that like there's a too strong or that like you shouldn't be training hard.
Yeah, like there is no definitive like everyone should be, this strong. Like even I'm looking at the World Health Organization, or I think it's the CDC's recommendation, and it's like they just say you should strength train twice a week, but they don't say like you should be able to lift, a certain amount. And even at that, it's like, if you intrinsically enjoy strength training, if it has like, physical, of course, but like mental health benefits, and if like you have minimal to like no risk of injury or injury problems, then it's like, what is the downside? It's like get as strong as you possibly can be, because like what's the issue. So you're making me think of the Kevin Bass debate about like, people shouldn't squat and deadlift heavy and stuff. Do you think there's anyone who should like avoid deadlifting or squatting heavy altogether, or they should like consider it more than other people? Is there anyone that you would say should like do like a little bit of thinking before squatting or deadlifting heavy?
I really can't think of anyone off of the top of my head that I wouldn't advise to like squat or deadlift heavy. And heavy's relative, right? Like, doesn't mean like, cool, you're brand new at deadlifting, go and deadlift 300 pounds,
Even though people try and do that, I see some people are like, oh, I'll do my 1 rep max. And I'm like, but why are you doing your 1 rep max? Like, what is the point? And it's just, they don't really even have one. I'm like, okay, don't.
Yeah, I think that like heavy lifting gets a bad reputation because we see, power lifters who are like very into the sport, doing like really heavy things and straining really hard. But that doesn't necessarily need to be what everybody does, you know? I think meeting people where they're at and making sure that it's challenging, but like making sure that it's appropriate is what's important. Like there's no real bad movements or dangerous lifts. It's all about meeting people where they're at and finding it's dose dependent, right? It's the dose makes the poison. So as long as you're not like going in and deadlifting like your 1 rep max or just like throwing 300 pounds arbitrarily on the bar day one, like you're going to be fine because your body can learn the movement, it can adapt to the movement, it can adapt to the stress. That's the beautiful thing about our bodies is like we're not cars. We don't wear down and break out. We can or break down. We can actually like adapt to the stress that we're imposing on our bodies and get stronger and recover from it and handle it very well.
Yeah, like people are extremely resilient. Like I got hit by a car, I dislocated my shoulder, and then I did a powerlifting meet after. So, and I don't feel any issue in my shoulder. So it's like we are very, very resilient. So you're talking about matching like the dose to the client. And like a new idea that I've heard of in strength training is like matching the stimulus to our fatigue and kind of like taking each session as it comes. So can you talk about that a little bit and sort of like, I guess, like kind of reps and reserve training and that approach to training?
Yeah. So, you know, stimulus to fatigue is just like the amount of like pretty much the amount of like muscle building adaptations we're getting to the fatigue that we're producing in the person. So when we're picking exercises for people, we want to meet people where they're at. So for some people, that might be a barbell deadlift, and that would be great for them. For other people, that might look more like, you know, an RDL with some 5-pound dumbbells, you know. We don't necessarily want to pick exercises that are going to allow us to like lift the most weight possible because sometimes there's like a fatigue cost to that that's not like necessarily like worth the benefit, and there's an exercise that would be more appropriate where the stimulus is greater than the fatigue cost for that exercise. And if we can do that, that's gonna be better because we're going to be able to recover from that. We're still going to get a ton of benefit from it. So autoregulation is also a good way to kind of like help meet people where they're at. So autoregulation is basically just a framework that we can give somebody for meeting themselves where they're at in training. So we know from research that like your strength levels are going to fluctuate on a day-to-day basis, and that can be related to previous training, that can be related to your sleep, that can be related to your nutrition, your stress levels, your mood for the day. So many different things can affect how you're performing in a session. And we want to be able to kind of like assess our readiness to train or where we're at in that session day to day so that we can meet the stimulus that we're after, or we can meet ourselves where we're at. So like the absolute like performance in each session doesn't matter as much as us getting the stimulus that we're looking for. And autoregulation can help us with that. And so there's a couple of different ways we can autoregulate training. The one that a lot of people will be familiar with is RPE, which just stands for rating of perceived exertion. So it's a scale that we can use from 0 to 10 to rate our perceived exertion on an exercise. So how hard something felt. 0 being like laying in bed, 10 being like the hardest you've ever tried before. Another way that we can do that is through RIR, so reps in reserve, and we can use like RPE via reps in reserve. So an example would be like an RPE 10 might be a weight you can do where you've got 0 reps in reserve, and an RPE 9 would be, you know, a weight you can do with 1 rep left in reserve, and an RPE 8 would be 2 reps left in reserve, and so on and so forth. And that gives people a little bit more of like a tangible way of like rating their perceived exertion, because sometimes like, you know, how hard that feel on a scale from 0 to 10 is a little bit arbitrary, but like asking people, how many more reps do you think you could have done on that set? So like an example, we might ask somebody to do like a set of 8 on squats and work up to a weight where they can do the set of 8, but they're going to leave 2 reps left in the tank. So meaning if they did 2 more reps, they would fail. And that's a little bit easier for people to think about. Like, so that's one way to do it. Velocity-based training is another way to do it, where we measure the speed on a bar or the speed of an exercise, but that's not very accessible for a lot of people because you have to have a device for measuring velocity, and that's just not going to be realistic for most people. But that is one way to do it, and that's how a lot of like RPE or like autoregulation research is done, is by looking at like velocity. But I like to provide my clients with some knowledge around autoregulation so that they can meet themselves where they're at in their training sessions. And people will surprise themselves. Like a lot of times you can come into a training session feeling like super tired, you didn't get a lot of sleep, or you're feeling stressed out. And I like to tell my clients, like, go into a session without any expectations because you'll surprise yourself. Like you can feel, people have probably experienced this before. When I tell people this, they're like, oh, I've felt that before. Where you go into a session, you're tired, you're expecting to feel like crap in the session, and then you go and you warm up and you PR or you feel great. And then conversely, like you can go into a session, like you're amped, you're ready for this session, you're excited for this exercise, you're ready to go, and you warm up and you're just not at the level where you want to be that day, even though you're really excited and psyched for your training. And sometimes that happens. And so being able to like meet yourself where you're at is really helpful. It's going to keep training more sustainable, because instead of going in and like hyperventilating about like the weight you have to hit in a training session, like, oh my God, I got to squat 300 pounds today because that's what the training plan says, but I'm tired and I'm scared of that weight and like all these different things. Instead of that, you can go into the session with that expectation, warm up, figure out where you're at for the day, and hit what's going to be appropriate for you. So psychologically, it's less stressful. And then just physiologically too, it keeps your training more sustainable. It keeps it so that like the training is hard enough for you to get stronger, but it's not so hard that it's demolishing you session after session. You're not going to hit a wall as soon. You're going to be able to train for longer, and you're going to enjoy your training more. So
Yeah, I love that idea that like whatever ability you have on a given day is just what you set the stimulus to. So for my
yeah,
own training today, after this, I have 3 sets just on squats. I have 3 sets, and I'm going to hit 3 reps, and it's going to be 4 in reserve. And so the weight is just up in the air. Do you set your training up like that, or would you give a client a weight and then just say get as many reps as you can, or what would your approach be?
there's lots of different ways to do it. I typically will like keep the rep range fixed and then give somebody like an exertion level to hit, whatever that may be for that person and like their goals. But you can also say like, let's hit an AMRAP. So you're going to put 135 pounds on the bar and you're going to rep it out until it feels like RPE 9, till you feel like you've only got one more rep left. That's another way to auto-regulate. You can also use auto-regulation for volume. I can say, okay, you're going to do that weight and you're going to keep doing sets until that weight feels like an RPE 9 or something like that. And then as soon as it does, you stop the session there. So there's lots of different ways that you can do it. Or you keep the rep range fixed, or where you just keep the exertion level fixed and the rep range can be flexible, or like so many different ways that you can use it. So
Yeah, I typically know what weights work for my clients, but we warm up in their sessions. And what I've switched over to doing is basically I'm like, right, keep going till you have 2 left or till you have 5 left or whatever. And it's so funny, I feel bad. I've decided like this is a better approach. But then I feel bad telling the clients like what what to think of, because I feel like I'm giving them more work when in actual fact I'm matching the stimulus to their ability. So instead of me just plucking a number out of the sky being like, well, you did 10 last week, so like you should be able to do 12 this week. It's like, no, like you just keep going till you have like 1 left or whatever. So I guess, who do you think it's very effective for, or the most effective for? And who do you think like autoregulation is less effective for?
I think that I think it's effective for everybody, honestly. And I think like what you're doing is good. Like I'll do that sometimes where I'll have people do like an AMRAP, or I'll just prescribe like a different rep range, because it can be like kind of like an RPE audit for people. Like it can help them stay real. Like some people like to undershoot. Like they're like, I don't know, I think I only have like 2 more reps left there, but we're watching them and I'm like, that looks like warm up weight. Like I know you've got like 5 more probably. Or other clients I have who love training and love to push hard, and they're like, yeah, that was RPE 8. And I'm like, that was like a bone on bone, like grindy rep. You definitely did not have 2 more reps left there. And so kind of what you're doing is a good way to like audit your RPE and like, well, let's just see how many more reps you can do here until it feels like that, like an RPE 9 or something like that. And then that can help people calibrate their RPE a little bit better. But I think RPE, I think auto-regulation is appropriate for everybody. I think if you're brand new to it, it can be a little bit hard because you're not used to thinking about your training that way, and you might not have enough experience to know what your actual limits are, especially if you've never maxed out or you've never failed a lift before. Sometimes you don't really know where your limit is. But I think that you can become accurate enough with experience. Like the more you start thinking about your training that way and the more you practice using autoregulation, the more precision you're going to have with judging your own RPE. And there's things that we can do as coaches to help people with that. Like you were saying, an AMRAP for an RPE audit, or one of the things that I like to do with my clients who are pretty new to strength training is like, I will have them squat twice in 1 week, just a regular squat, no variations, nothing crazy. But like session 1 will be like, let's do 4 reps at RPE 8. And then session, at the end of the session where later in the week when we're squatting again, I'll say, let's do 8 reps at RPE 8. Sometimes what happens is like my clients do the same weight that they did on Monday on Friday, but this time they did it for 8 reps. And I'm like, okay, so what does that tell you about, like, you didn't get that much stronger like in a few days. So maybe your RPE, like your calibration is a little bit off. And now that you know you can do this weight for 8 reps, next week you're probably going to go a little heavier on that like lower rep set. So I like to do that sometimes because it helps. It gives people a little bit more context and a little bit more experience with the lift and about where their limits are to help them calibrate the RPE a little bit more. Yeah.
I really like that because you can set up kind of like a framework or just, check in and actually see exactly how accurate they are. And something else I'm thinking of, you said that this approach works for everybody. I'm thinking that like, there's no kind of wrong answer really. So like if I have a brand new client in and I'm like, okay, we're going to squat 135 because you said you've done it before. I want you to keep going until you have 5 left. Like if they did 1 rep and they're like, yeah, I can only do 6. It's like, well, that's how you feel on the day. So that's the right answer. There's no, what you get is the right answer. What do you think of that?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like we discussed, your strength levels can fluctuate day to day. So just because you've done something in the past historically doesn't mean you're going to be able to do it on that day. And so I think it can work for any situation.
Yeah, I think you can tailor it or set it up so that it's effective for any client. Yeah.
And I won't always like frame it that way for people. Like sometimes if I'm just starting with a client, like all I will do is like, let's warm up and work up to something that feels like moderately challenging. And like, as we're warming up or as we're like increasing in weight, I'll just ask them like, how many more reps do you think you could do if you had to keep going? And I'll just start putting that question in their mind over a few sessions. And then, by session 3 or 4, we can talk about RPE or reps in reserve because we've already been kind of thinking about it that way.
Nice. Yeah. You kind of like take small steps towards it. Yeah, that's really useful. So Natasha, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for the time and the great conversation. Is there any links or anything that you want to plug before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, if anybody wants to check out my content or anything like that, they can find me on Instagram is the best place to find me. I post a lot of content there and in my Instagram stories. That's kind of it. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Yeah, no, thank you for your time, and your content is very good, so I would highly recommend anyone check it out and listening. So thanks very much, and we'll talk again soon.
Awesome.